Welcome back. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's take a look at some satellite imagery. Today, Fox News exclusively obtained these images, revealing what an opposition group says is a previously undisclosed Iranian nuclear weapons facility. It's raising fresh concerns amid ongoing negotiations between Tehran and the Trump administration. The newly identified site is far from the regime's already known nuclear facilities, and it comes as President Trump has been slightly toughening his rhetoric on Tehran's nuclear program. Host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer, is here. Hal, if the media knows about this site, how much more does the U.S. government know about this site? When stuff like this leaks, we always got to assume the government knows more than us, correct?
Oh, well, Austin, absolutely. And I can tell you that the U.S. knows about it, certainly the Five Eyes, if you will, the U.S. being part of that, but Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, we all share intelligence. But this is something that U.S. Central Command would probably share with a number of allies in the region. I can't say for sure, but I would be surprised if Israel didn't know about this site. And this was one of the problems under the JCPOA. This is one of the problems with the inspection regime that was going on with the UN. When they would go in and do these inspections, it was a game of cat and mouse. It kind of reminds me of the cat and mouse game that we used to have with Iraq when Saddam Hussein was there and we're looking for weapons of mass destruction while he was still in power, that he would always do these deceptive things. This is typical of Iran, that they would do something where they have a secret, this rainbow site, as they call it, this secret site where they're doing nuclear development. Now, of course, the challenge for a targeteer is you can't be entirely sure what's there until you get on the ground and actually look into it. So they're having to infer based on the size of things, activity, anything they can glean, pick up on it, what the site's actually being used for. But it looks like it's probably for nuclear weapons. And that's the problem. If you have a negotiated settlement with the Iranians, and any of that is resting on their good faith to tell you, what they have. Well, here's an example where they're hiding what they actually have.
So does it make you wonder how photos like this get out? Where do they come from? Who releases them? Could there be some negotiating in public happening right now?
Could be a little bit of that. And I will tell you that with commercial imagery, it has changed everything. If you've looked at some of the stuff that Bellingcat has done, where they have used satellite imagery just brilliantly in what we call OSINT, or open source intelligence, to ferret out what the Russians have been doing and various other countries have been doing around the world. It's very available. News services, media, folks like me that do strategic risk stuff. Anybody can actually subscribe to this, can buy this imagery and look at it and use it for their own purposes. And the imagery is very good. This is the kind of stuff that way back when, I don't want to say how many decades ago, but way back when, stuff like this, the general public would never see this. If I was to see something like this would be something that I'd have to have a very high security clearance, which I had. And I could see things like this. But now with commercial imagery, with all the stuff that's up there and the availability of it and the ability to exploit it, you can see this. And in this case, is it negotiating in public? To some extent. I will say that if we're trying to prepare the public for possible military action in Iran, there is some of this negotiating the public that has to happen, because you're preparing the public for what, the reason why we may have to take military action.
So a lot of look at the White House, 1144 in the nation's capital. President Trump has been hardening his rhetoric, Hal, about Iran's nuclear program. He said in a radio interview this week that he prefers a negotiated deal, but he also said, quote, "We could actually blow him up or just de-nuke him." He also said, "There are only two alternatives, blow him up nicely or blow him up viciously," unquote. If Trump is using this kind of language, Hal, is this indicative that the nuclear negotiations that are supposed to continue in Oman this Sunday, by the way, is it indicative that the negotiations aren't going well?
Well, obviously if they're going really well, we wouldn't use language like that. So yes, it is indicative of that. The other thing is it's a pressure point. It's putting real pressure on Iran, and it's telling them, hey, we have not and this may have been Intelligence is kind of an interesting business. You're always trying to figure out what the other person is thinking, what their impression of something is. It could be we picked up the impression that Iran thought that we were, anxious to make a deal. And frankly, some of the things we've been saying probably were a little confusing to our Iranian counterparts. For example, Steve Witkoff came back from the first, I think it was the first meeting, and started talking about we're going to allow the Iranians to enrich uranium up to 3.67%. And of course, that was the same number that they were allowed to do under the JCPOA, which was the Obama era agreement that President Trump pulled out of in his first term. So there was a lot of criticism from across the aisle in the U.S. and elsewhere, which is, are you doing Obama too? And of course, I can just say that it didn't sound like that type of language was receptive at the White House. So there was a lot of pulling back from that, but now it's not clear. I have heard that at times that's been kind of left open. Will we allow the Iranians to have any uranium enrichment capability? And then at other times, it sounds like, no, we're not going to allow them to have any enrichment capability. In fact, President Trump said, no, they're not going to have centrifuges. Well, that's kind of indicative of not letting them have any enrichment capability overall, even though technically we haven't said absolutely no that they can't have any enrichment capability. Of course, the view of the Israelis is absolutely not. They can have no enrichment capability. And that may be where we're leaning. And the Iranians have said that's a red line. That's a deal breaker. They will not agree to it. And so, going into this weekend, recognizing what that is, maybe we're going to put, basically lay down the law and say you cannot have enrichment capability. And it may be something where the U.S. and the Iranians walk away, in which case you want to have a public prepared for, option B, if you will.
What kind of rhetoric does Iran use toward the White House? Obviously, anything that you and I hear comes through translations, but Trump using some language there. What kind of language do they use against the White House?
If they're trying to get something, generally speaking, if they're trying to work something out, you may hear language that is fairly even. And by that, I mean they're not condemning the president, the White House, the United States outright. They're just kind of saying things as they are. On a regular basis, they tend to be very condemnatory of the United States. They tend to be very disparaging of whichever president's in the White House. But if they're getting something they want, then they tend to be a little bit more even-handed in terms of how they describe it. And right now, they've been very strong in saying they will not agree to giving up any enrichment capability. They've been very strong on that, but they haven't used some of the other language, which they have in the recent past, which has been, let's just say, very disparaging of the United States, very disparaging of the White House, and very disparaging.
Thank you. Good morning.
Israel, pretty much the entire West. That's the type of normal rhetoric that we hear from Iran. That's kind of in sync with their ideology, their theological autocracy, and how they justify themselves. So we will see, and we're going to have to listen very carefully going into this weekend, during this weekend, but especially coming out of this weekend. That will be very telling where we are. And if we hear a lot of condemnatory language of the United States, of the Trump administration, of the president, well, that kind of tells you what kind of went on behind the scenes as far as where we're going in terms of next steps.
As always, Hal, it's good to see you. Hal is the host of the Strat Podcast. You can listen to it anywhere podcasts are available, as always. Good to see you. We'll talk soon.